I'm David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, and it's a pleasure to welcome you tonight to the William G. McGowan Theater and the National Archives. And welcome to the 8th Annual McGowan Forum on Communications, communicating the message, election results, and ramifications. Before we get on with our program, I especially want to take this opportunity to thank Sujin McGowan and the William G. McGowan Charitable Fund, Inc., represented tonight by Diana Spencer, the Executive Director of the Fund. Thank you very much, Diana, for your support. The Fund has supported this forum for the entire 8 years. Tonight's panel discussion is presented in partnership with the United States Association of Former Members of Congress, and it brings to a close our year-long series of conversations on timely political topics during this election season. In the spring, a distinguished panel of former members examined the evolving state of congressional and presidential campaigns over time, and this summer, another equally distinguished panel looked at the effect of the economy and job creation on elections. Tonight, we have a panel of seasoned political hands and commentators with us to discuss Tuesday's election results. They'll examine how the changing means and methods of communication affected the outcome, and they will share their thoughts on who best took advantage of traditional media outlets and social media to deliver their messages to voters. So many of the programs that occur in this theater and in other venues in this building are the result of our partnership with the Foundation for the National Archives. That includes this theater itself, the Public Vaults, the O'Brien Gallery, the Boeing Learning Center, and the Archives Shop, whose profits help fund our exhibition and education programs. Now I have the honor of introducing the chair and president of the foundation, Alelia Bundles, is president of the Madam Walker, Alelia Walker Family Archives, and author of the book On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker, the award-winning New York Times best-selling biography of her great-great-grandmother. She's currently at work on the first comprehensive biography of her great-grandmother, Alelia Walker, whose Harlem Renaissance parties helped define that era. After a 30-year career as an executive and Emmy-winning producer with NBC News and ABC News, Alelia now devotes her time to writing and serving on nonprofit boards. Alelia Bundles.
Thank you very much, David, the Archivist of the United States. It's always fun to be right after David. We've become a really good tag team, I think. So good evening to everyone. On behalf of the board and the staff of the Foundation for the National Archives, it's my pleasure to welcome you. In this 8th year of the annual McGowan Forum on Communications, Technology, and Government, we once again are very grateful to the William G. McGowan Charitable Fund and to our board member, Sujin McGowan, for their very generous support. Because of them, we are sitting in this beautiful theater, and because of them, we are hosting this evening's Insider's View of a fascinating election season. Nothing takes the place in communicating with voters like face-to-face contact, of knocking on doors and shaking hands. But the way campaigns communicate now is light years away from the way they communicated even a decade ago. The changes we have seen in the last 2 election cycles were in full force this time around. Truly, this is a campaign year like no other, with its reliance on tweets and quants and data mining and super PAC funds, YouTube videos, ground games, Facebook, and pre-election legal challenges. When I covered Jesse Jackson's bid for president and Geraldine Ferraro's vice presidential campaign in 1984 for NBC News, we were cutting edge because one of our producers was a gadget guy who had managed to find a suitcase-sized portable phone for us. No other network had one of these phones. Only a handful of reporters had Radio Shack computers, and every night we shipped our video tapes on the plane to New York from the last campaign stop. There was none of this feeding stuff over phones and computers. Now in November 2012, we can only imagine what changes we'll see in 2016 and 2020. And now I'd like to tell you a little bit about Sujin McGowan. Sue is the founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of Flying Food Group, a production company which supplies international airlines and specialty retailers. If you've flown from Chicago, LA, New York, Miami, Shanghai, any number of cities, you've sampled Flying Food's menu. Sue is also the owner and founder of New Management Limited, a real estate sales, leasing, management, and development firm with extensive holdings in the Chicago metropolitan area. In addition to being our partner at the Foundation for the National Archives, Sue serves on several other boards, including Exelon, Commonwealth Edison, Chicago's Field Museum, and Chicago Botanical Gardens. She also is president of Su Ling Jen Charitable Fund and president of the William G. McGowan Charitable Fund. Representing Sue this evening is Diana Spencer, executive director of McGowan Charitable Fund. Please help me welcome Diana Spencer.
Thank you, Alelia. I'm delighted to be here with you this evening. I was going to be here this evening anyway, but am now going to share with you Sue's remarks on her behalf. She was called away on business unexpectedly and does send her regrets. So I'm not going to say I'm Sue Jen McGowan, president of the McGowan Board. I don't think I could ever pull that off. We look nothing alike. So here are Sue's thoughts for you this evening. Welcome to our 8th annual McGowan Forum on Communications. Shortly after Bill's death in 1992, the fund was established in order to preserve his values and ideals. Through its grant-making programs, the fund helps address human need and protect society's most vulnerable populations. We partner with effective community providers in the areas of healthcare and medical research, education, and community initiatives. We support programs ranging from food banks to dental clinics, youth drop-in centers, to homeless shelters, charter schools, and out-of-school programming. The fund has now extended over $100 million in grants in these key areas since its inception. 3 years ago, we added a new legacy program to our commitment to social initiatives. That is the McGowan Fellows Program. Through it, the fund seeks to build a community of future business leaders who will pair concern for society as a whole with success in their chosen careers. Bill, who strongly believed that business success and ethics should go hand in hand, was able to complete his MBA studies at Harvard Business School because he received a scholarship to carry him through his second year. In that spirit, the fund awards full tuition scholarships to 10 second-year MBA students at 10 leading U.S. business schools. The schools partner with the fund to find outstanding candidates for the Fellows Program. We have welcomed our 3rd class of Fellows this year, bringing the number of talented, ethical future business leaders to 30. This exciting program is flourishing, sending ripples of excellence throughout the academic, business, and governmental communities. By 2020, there will be 100 McGowan Fellows advancing an ethical agenda as they advance their careers. The William G. McGowan Theater represents another aspect of Bill's life and legacy. He loved history, he loved movies, and he loved debating the great ideas of the day. In 2003, the fund partnered with the National Archives to develop this wonderful venue where outstanding films and documentaries are screened and the public can join the national debate and examine cutting-edge ideas. An annual forum on communications was also established to augment the theater. You may wonder why communications? Well, Bill McGowan was a giant in the communications industry. As head of MCI, he led his upstart communications company in a nearly decade-long battle challenging AT&T's longtime monopoly on U.S. phone service. The Justice Department joined MCI's suit, and in 1982, the victory over AT&T revived the U.S. phone industry. It sparked competition and innovation and paved the way for today's advances in global communications technology. Bill was able to overcome AT&T, because democracy protected the rule of law and open communication. Our national presidential election is a standard bearer of democracy, so it is appropriate that our topic today is communicating the message, election results and ramifications. Our distinguished panel will discuss the national election and the campaign. They'll explore a wide array of communications channels now used by candidates to reach out to voters. We've surely come a long way from whistle stops and radio fireside chats. How many of you remember those? Our moderator is journalist and political commentator Stephen Roberts. Panelists include former members of Congress Ann Northrup, Albert Wynn, Tom Davis, Bart Gordon. They are joined by David Plotz, editor of Slate. I can't wait to hear the real scoop on the campaign, the candidates, and what to expect next. Please enjoy this truly relevant and revealing analysis.
Thank you very much, Diana. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dennis Hertel, a six-term Democratic member of Congress from Michigan and a past president of the United States Association of Former Members of Congress, our partners for this evening's program. During his congressional tenure, Mr. Hertel served on the Armed Services Committee for 12 years, was chair of the Subcommittee on Investigations and Oversight, and a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Research and Development. He served on the former Select Committee on Aging and its Subcommittee on Health. Mr. Hertel was elected vice chair of the Democratic Study Group and was a Democratic Caucus regional whip. He represented Congress as a NATO Assembly delegate. He continues his work in government relations and has expanded his expertise into an even wider range of issues. Please help me welcome Dennis Hertel.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of the Former Members of Congress Association. We have over 650 former members of the House and the Senate. We have programs that reach our university and high school students, over 40 universities a year. We always send a Republican and a Democrat. And the same overseas. We also have extensive election monitoring for our democracy building program. And so we're very, very happy to be here in conjunction with the National Archives. It's been a long, arduous election. And so I'm not going to keep you from the panel. I'm very excited about hearing our panel tonight and getting on with our program. I'd like to introduce them to you now. David Platz from Slate Magazine, Bart Gordon, former member from Tennessee, Tom Davis, a very good friend from Virginia, Al Wynn, our former congressman from Maryland, Ann Northrup, former congresswoman from Kentucky, and Steve Roberts, our moderator, who's been with the New York Times, National Public Radio, and ABC News for such a very, very long time. We really appreciate all of them being here this evening.
Welcome. Delighted that you all could join us for this subject that is on everybody's mind, how people get information about elections. And as several people have already told you, it's changing very rapidly. I teach a course in this subject at George Washington University, and this is how rapidly it changes. I have to download information for the course an hour before class. If I try to teach this subject out of a textbook, it would be out of date the day it was published. In fact, some of it is out of date when the course begins. I've got to change it right in the middle. That's how dynamic and how rapid this change is. So I'll throw out some questions, get the conversation going, and then we'll leave plenty of time for those of you in the audience to join in as well. And so think of some questions. We're going to be happy to have your contributions. But I want to start with the old media, in a sense, because the candidates raised millions and millions and millions of dollars, not just on the presidential level, but in congressional Senate level, online. They raised it through the email solicitations. They raised it in all sorts of new social media platforms. And yet when they spent it on the old media. Most of it was spent on television as opposed to other media. So the first question I have was that money wasted? This billions of dollars spent on old media. Did the candidates get what they paid for? Tom, why don't you start?
Well, as you know, I was chairman of the campaign committee for the House Republicans. For 2 cycles, the world has changed, and I think money was basically wasted. You look at the results, return on investment for American Crossroads and some of these groups, yeah, I think they blew the money. Given that amount of money, maybe they didn't know how much they'd have at the end when they got it. But I think most of it was just put in the trash can.
What about the rest of you? You agree? Wasted, Ann?
You know, I had $3.5 million races every 2 years, probably one of the most expensive congressional races every 2 years. And, you know.
Is that because the legislature didn't like you?
No, it's just because I had a very Democrat district. There was no way you could get to a Democrat majority without me being one of the victims. And in fact, I used to tease Steny Hoyer. He was on the plane so often to Louisville. I'd say, why don't you just stay at my house? You know? we become such good friends on the plane. But, you know, as Tom knows, the NRCC and I'm sure the DCCC worked very hard to put together the best ads they possibly can in behalf of the independent expenditures that they for the campaigns they're trying to fund. But they seldom hit the spot. They seldom exactly meld with what the idea is that the candidate themselves are trying to put out there. And so I just say, first of all—
These are the independent expenditures.
These are independent, right. So I'd say, first of all, nothing will replace a candidate and their ability to articulate an issue, to present themselves, to lay out a position and a plan that is acceptable and interesting to the public. All ads can do is to help to reiterate that. They're 30 seconds, they're short, they're abbreviations of what you say, and these ads are sometimes good. I wouldn't say that the campaign ads that I saw this year, especially, well, I'd say 2/3 of them were particularly on spot, particularly effective. And the ones then that came in as independent expenditures, I felt like often missed the mark. And so in that case, yeah, they would be wasted.
David, you follow this for Slate, and I'm interested in your reaction to the view that this was the most negative campaign ever in ads. Do you think that's true, and why was it so negative?
I think that's something that everyone always says because they've just experienced it and they've experienced it as a burst of negativity. I would like to just sort of retreat to an earlier point though, as it relates to this, which is that even though there's this huge amount of money, I think the TV campaign is going to turn out to be the least interesting aspect of this campaign. That this campaign, what's fascinating about it did not take place on TV. What's fascinating about it took place in the data mining and in
I'll get to that in a minute.
The outreach. So I do think that there was this huge amount of money that was spent, which was basically, I agree with Tom.
Well,
was
why, if it's so wasted, why did they spend so much money on it?
Because they don't know yet.
Bart?
Well, I would agree with much of what's been said, but let me add something to that. And I won't get into the data mining, but there was, TV is more expensive than the social media. And so you may see a lot of dollars go there, but it doesn't mean that particularly the Obama campaign didn't invest a lot of time and effort into the social media. What you have seen in conventional wisdom is people say, well, this was the status quo election. The president got reelected, kept the Democratic Senate, kept a Republican House, and so money didn't really matter. There was a Wall Street Journal article today, and it was entitled, Super PAC Impact Appears Limited. And there was a commentator that said, speaking of the super PACs, they were barking dogs that didn't bite. Well, let me just tell you that I think money does matter. If you had not been on the air, the reason it didn't matter that much, because there was a détente. There was so much money spent at each other.
Or it's actually the opposite of a détente. It was an arms race.
Well, or you could say an arms race, exactly. And so so each side was forced to think that if you didn't go on, that it didn't matter, you'd have been crushed. in my opinion. And then within, if you want to go to media money, there's smart money and there's dumb money. Dumb money doesn't help you that much, but there's smart money. The president's, right after the Republican primary, media was smart money. And I think most folks think that it was the foundation of making a difference, in this race, particularly when you had a president that was, running with the highest unemployment since Franklin Roosevelt. I mean, he had no business winning. So, I think it had to have an impact there.
We tried to make that point. I didn't.
Well, and I think he successfully made it that it was President Bush's fault. But anyway, but again, so then you look at, okay, other smart money. John Barrow really deserves the Artful Dodger Award, I think, for this election, and that he was in an enormously Republican seat there. But he had a
From
plan.
Georgia.
Georgia. He had a plan, and that was that they had a relatively inexpensive media market. And so he got outspent quite a bit. He just needed enough money to be able to lock up all he needed there. And so I think that was smart money. But the other, and then I'll editorialize and I'll try to be quick and out. Money had a tremendous impact because the impact it's having on future candidates, and really on candidates now. I mean, to think that you, as a candidate, that you can have anonymous millions of dollars dropped on you at a moment makes you fearful. Do I really want to run? I've got to maintain my financial and my constituency base. And with so much redistricting now, partisan redistricting, it means you really can't think, for example, with this coming fiscal cliff.
Yeah.
It's going to be a really tough vote.
We'll get into that, but let me
Go out, but I'm saying the reason it's a tough vote is because of the media.
Yeah.
And the money being spent.
Albert Wynn, you've got Karl Rove and others raised $57 million from Sheldon Adelson, from one guy and his wife. They didn't win back, the Republicans didn't win back the Senate. They didn't win the presidency. What are they saying to Sheldon Adelson today? Your $57 million well spent or not? And how do they explain themselves?
Well, I think Sheldon Adelson is probably saying, what the hell did you do with my money? I agree with the panelists that most of that money was wasted, but in the case of mutually assured destruction, you had to spend it. I think the most important point is the messaging underlying the money and the tactics underlying the money that, as someone said, there is smart money and dumb money. The smart money in this race was Obama's ground operation. Ground operations aren't free. People have the idea that there are a lot of people running around in tennis shoes who are volunteers. There are a lot of professionals on the ground. There are a lot of campaign offices that have to be set up. Obama probably led Romney by 3-1 in campaign offices in Colorado, for example. And so spending on media is one element of it, but just in the context of spending money, wasting money, money well spent is money that accomplishes your objective. And ground money, I think, was critical in this election. And then to go quickly to something Ann said, there are very few silver bullets out there. You're spending all this money hoping that there are a couple of silver bullets in these hundreds and hundreds of ads. You can go online and find the 10 best and the 10 worst, and you'll be appalled. You'll say, my God, these ads were great. Unfortunately, some of the best ads were by people who didn't have contested races. Most people say Kristi Noem, a Republican, I think South Dakota, North Dakota?
South Dakota.
South Dakota had one of the best ads of all, featuring her grandmother. She didn't really have a hard race, and I don't think Democrats are going to do that well. So again, a lot of wasted money, a lot of bad messaging, but a lot of tactical decisions that may not have been the wise.
Well, what was the
Karl Rove's answer was it'd have been worse. He's quoted today as saying to those folks, if you hadn't put up the money, it would have been worse.
And I would add.
You won one race. I guess it can get worse.
problem
Well, no.
with that
Wait. Can I make a point?
I'm just telling you what that's what he.
Yeah, no, I'm sure he said
That was his response.
Would have been
The question
worse
is he
in
didn't spend
terms
it
of,
wisely.
would have been worse for Republicans if they hadn't given the money.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the response.
Wait, can I, I'm sorry,
Okay.
Anna, just to make a point about this, I do think if you're Sheldon Adelson, you think 57 million, really, as a percentage of his net worth, it's trivial. So he is not sweating that 57 million.
cash.
Well,
But
actually, he
it's-
said that today.
Yeah, but it's also that even today, even now, politics is a cheap investment. If you're an incredibly rich person,
Exactly.
you can still buy a huge amount of influence for what is a relatively small amount of money. So I don't think the fact of this defeat is going to deter very rich people from throwing their money into politics, because I do think you can still buy a tremendous amount with what is for them a small amount of money.
Tom, what do you want to
I
say?
was going to say, between campaign finance reform, which I'm proud to say I voted against, and Citizens United, the whole world has changed with all of these independent groups. We have basically moved the power away from political parties, which have been a centering force in American democracy for 200 years, out to these groups right and left. But your question was, were the independent ads worth it? Would they get their money's worth? No. Look, putting money on the ground, you have to have some of that. I agree with you, Bart. You can't go unarmed. But a lot of these ads were superfluous. You turned on the playoff games, and you saw more of Romney than you saw of Bryce Harper. I mean, it was just crazy how much you were seeing of this stuff. And there comes a point where you're oversaturated, and they would have been better off putting it on the ground, getting some email lists. I will just say in the Senate campaign in Virginia, Tim Kaine had a much better game, with the new media than Alan did. Alan was TV, he was old style. What I'd get on my BlackBerry or your iPhone was second rate. That is where things are moving and are making critical differences, and it's one reason Republicans are having a more difficult time reaching the younger electorate. We can argue we got a message and they weren't hearing it, but we're not transferring it the right way.
That's an important point, and several of you have already mentioned that a lot of the money is moving toward social media. It's also moving toward online advertising. Right. I mean, this was one of the big changes from the last election, was how much of the advertising budget went into online advertising. And I have former students who work in this who said that we can basically send an ad to an individual. We can target down to the individual recipient based on her browsing history, based on what she's bought. We can figure out the ad to send. Now, how does that, if that's true, how does that change from the perspective of people like yourselves who try to communicate with voters? How does that change the dynamic, the relationship, Ann, between you and voters?
Well, I think it becomes more sophisticated, but I want to go back to the original question tied to what you said. It has to be an effective ad. And I can tell you, in all of my campaigns, I used the same media person. I think he's fabulous. I always thought he was fabulous. But he would write a script, and we would get it and go, no way. And it would take 7 people agonizing, improving this, shaping it, talking about what the themes were, and then yes, Larry made a fabulous ad out of it. But he won many awards with our ads, because they can't just be the first draft of you get 5 drafts.
But what is the difference between doing that on TV and doing that online? What is the difference?
I think because of the data mining and the other sophisticated targeting techniques, you know more about your constituent. You know more about the target that you're trying to reach, and then you can shape, and she's absolutely right about that shaping process, but then you can shape the ad much more to that individual. The ability to isolate college-educated, single white females was absolutely critical in this election. It was the targeting. I mean, the messages are what they are, and they're the foundation. But if you know this person's characteristics, you can then target your message to them with much greater specificity and talk about the things that they care about, or bring to their attention something that they should care about, maybe weren't aware of. And I think this is what happened in this whole gender issue, which Obama won by about 10 points. Because he was talking directly to them in a very narrow and targeted way.
But it's an evolution of the same old techniques that we've always used. I pioneered something in congressional races almost 30 years ago, which was we had to go around at that time and hand copy all of the registered voters. And then we'd find out who voted, in what primaries. Then we'd find out which are the independents. So then we would call them, and we'd say, okay, which of these, 4 issues are more important to you? And then we would get a letter back to them on that issue. And so this is just an evolution on into, again, to the social media and different ways define
But think
that.
about-
But it
think
was still,
about
it was
if
still
you-
keying in on the issue that was important to them.
But you now, data mining enables campaigns to sift through vast amounts of data, which includes people's online browsing histories, everything they've ever bought, and every magazine they've ever subscribed to. Now, David, give me a sense of how you think that changes the relationship between a congressman like Bart Gordon 30 years ago and someone campaigning today.
Well, there's a wonderful book which I commend to everybody by a guy named Sasha Eisenberg. It's called The Victory Lab, and it's a detailed look, focusing in particular on the Obama campaign in 2008, and he's been writing for Slate about this in 2012, on just this point, about how they took the data and how the more sophisticated use of it made it, first of all, it makes your campaign much more efficient. You don't end up wasting time on people who aren't going to vote for you. And that's a tremendous value, because there's no, if someone's not going to bother to turn out, or they're going to turn out and vote for the wrong person, you shouldn't have spent any time or money on them. That's number one. I think the best example I heard coming out of this election actually was less high tech, which had to do with behavioral targeting. And the Obama people had a bunch of research psychologists who studied how people behave and looked at, in particular, what happens when people make a commitment to do something. So if people commit to do something, even if it's months earlier, they will follow up and do it. And so the Obama campaign made a concerted effort to get people to sign cards. They may have signed them back in April, they may have signed them a year ago, which said, I'm going to vote for President Obama because I support reproductive rights. They would sign these cards, and come October, the Obama campaign mailed those cards back to people, reminding them that they had done it. And it turns out that the turnout gain you get from that is enormous. People feel like, oh, I made a promise, I better follow up on it. And so that kind of insight and specificity and use of, that's a very personal thing. It's not actually technological, it's more personal, is an incredible development.
Well,
And
one-
campaigns are
Can
doing
I
it.
just simplify that? Let me just simplify that.
Yeah, sure.
My grandfather used to tell me that the most important road in the county is the one in front of your house. And so the objective is to figure out, what is their issue and communicate it in whatever is the best way.
No, I agree that smart politicians have always done the same thing. They've tried to figure out who their constituents are and what they want and meet their needs.
And these
But
are just new vehicles to do it.
But these new techniques refine this enormously. Now, one of the things that the Obama campaign did right from the beginning was that button that said, "Are you in?" And that was reflecting exactly the insight that Eisenberg is talking about. If you get people connected to the campaign, even at a very low level, you can increase gradually their identification and their sense of ownership. But Tom, why did Obama, you mentioned that one of the key things here this year was that the Obama people, they had some leads because they did this in 2008, but why, Romney had a lot of smart people working for him. Why did Obama have such an advantage in
Well,
this?
it was a 4-year operation. It was a 4-year campaign. They had lists going back 4 years. They continued to mine those lists throughout. They didn't just quit talking to people in 2008 and pick it up again in 2012. There was a continuing conversation, continuing to get email lists and the like. Romney's caught in a Republican showdown trying to get nominated and really couldn't come up for air until he had clinched the nomination. At that point, your lists are limited and it's much harder to break out of that. So Obama had a huge head start. I just say one thing, the Romney campaign in Virginia and elsewhere, they did very little on the registration side. Obama started early. He didn't have to worry about the nomination. So they're out going through every apartment complex in Northern Virginia, ringing doors in the weekend, trying anybody who lived there, but basically the ethics, registering to vote. They worry about turning them later, but getting them registered to vote, and then they turned them out on Election Day. Republicans ignore those places, number one, but secondly, while you're battling for the nomination, they never got a good registration effort, really never got good lists. So even if they played that game and got technologically proficient, they were behind the 8 ball.
And what about the use of social media as an ongoing communication tool? You've all been elected officials, except for me and David, but journalists use these tools too. I mean, I know Slate has been a pioneer in using social media to get your stories out. And so how does this change, the use of Twitter, the use of Facebook, the use of these new forms of communication, how does it change the relationship between a candidate and an elected official and her constituents?
Well, Steve, can I just make one other point on that? And that is, there's a huge generational gap in terms of the voting pattern this time. Republicans are doing really well among seniors. This is the Republican Party is going to cut Medicare and do the, but we do very well. Part of that's cultural, but part of it is the way you communicate. We're better at the old communication. We've got very little communications with the younger voters. And I think that is a key component of this generational shift in voting patterns.
Tom, I have to just say, I'm not quite so, I think you're right, your analysis of, but why that's true, I'm not so sure it's the communication. I
think it's a
feel
part of
that-
it. It's not total, but I
mean,
think it's a part.
I feel
a lot of
that-
it's cultural.
And let me say, all that we're talking about, all the Facebook, all the Twitter, and I have a Twitter account, and all during the debate, I'm looking at the Twitter account. But one debate did more to move the numbers than thousands of emails and Facebook. And I got to tell you, by the end, I'm so overwhelmed by what's coming into my inbox, into my Facebook. I mean, I have all those, and I believe that most of the American people, I believe there are some people that are so addicted to Facebook, they're on it all day. I feel like the rest of the people, they get so saturated that it has, the majority of Americans, it has a diminishing effect. And it's really the themes of the campaign. Nothing changed this campaign more than the first debate. Had nothing to do with the Facebook.
Yes, but he lost.
But you could make a case that
Well,
the connection
you
that he
might
made
make the
before
case
saved
that
it.
I'd say there's some other things. I would say it was the uniqueness of Barack Obama. Barack Obama has some constituencies that are extremely energized by him. For example, the college students are one of them. And as somebody said to me, a Republican mother and father, they're straight A student at U of L, Barack Obama. And I said, really, why? Because he's hot, because he's got swagger.
Okay, but
Let me jump in on something.
Yeah, try to talk about this. I really want to, you all have had the experience of communicating with constituents. You all have survived and prospered because you've been able to figure this out. I want to know whether you think this is a significant change in the way people communicate and you have a different relationship with your constituents or not.
Here's the point I want to make. Yes, there's new technology, Twitter, Facebook, what have you. I don't think there's a real big difference on either side, so I don't think either side has a substantial advantage in the new technology. The factor that makes the most difference is the messaging. I think Republicans are just as competent to use new media to communicate with single educated women as Democrats are. The difference is the message. You start talking about reproductive rights, you start talking about insurance, you start talking about children on parents' health insurance. That's messaging, and it doesn't matter about the media because each side can use the same technological tools. The underlying message is what dictates it, and that's where Obama had the advantage. He had a very coherent message on a lot of different issues that people could buy into, whether it was college tuition or whether it was reproductive rights.
Okay, I'm going to try to ask one more time.
Okay. Let me try to.
You don't trust us politicians.
Let me try to
No,
answer.
because we know all that. I want to know whether you think that there is a difference in the way public officials and candidates, because of the new communication systems, have a different relationship to their constituents or not.
Once again, this is an evolution. It's the same thing as how do you have that connection with, when I first got to Congress, we didn't have the internet. And so we had letters. There were less people voting, but we would answer all the letters and we would make that personal connection. So then the internet comes in.
Didn't you have the Pony Express?
No, yeah.
And they didn't even have phones in part of your district.
And so the next thing is then it's email, and you're setting up that relationship. Then Al Gore and others started doing open meetings. But the idea for folks like
It's either Albert or Ann.
absolutely.
Ann or
I'm sorry.
Albert.
Ann was in a very Democratic seat. I was in a very Republican seat.
Right.
But I got Republican votes because they thought they knew me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is just the next progression. The social media is the next progression going up. Now, again, you expand it, and there's more and more, but also it's getting more people to vote. So, again, this is just a progression of what we've always done. And if you want to say the politicians have taken advantage of whatever the new tools are that come along to do it.
Steve, let's talk about fundraising over the internet,
Yeah.
because that has changed markedly how you raise money, small contributions. I was getting emails from candidates saying, can you click $3? We need $3 to make our goal, constantly meeting this, and that's a real easy one to do. That doesn't feel like you're costing anything till you've done it about the 30th time. But my mother's generation, everything was in the mail. Our generation, we raise money by the phones, but the younger, it's all over the internet, and that it's changed it. It's how we communicate, how we raise money. Everything now for the younger generation is on the internet. It's not even, they don't even watch TV except through their computers now.
I'm going to try one more time,
Yeah.
just so to take your phrase. All that's changed is the efficiency. The efficiency's changed. We're faster, we can do more time, but it's all efficiencies. The message is still the key.
I
key
get
factor.
that, but I think David and I have a different view. I mean, I think there's not just a quantitative difference, I think there's a qualitative difference. I think the qualitative difference is that by using this new technology, what's different from every other new technology is it's the interactivity. It's the ability to press that button and answer back in real time. And I'm interested, David, in your view. You read Eisenberg, I have too. Whether the whole theory behind Obama's system was not just that this was a more efficient way of getting the same message out. That was not the theory. The theory was that you change the relationship with your supporters by giving them a greater role and a greater sense of ownership and connection to the campaign. It wasn't just that you gave them new information, you changed their mindset from being passive to active, to being part of the campaign. That's what they aimed at. Now, I'm interested in I think they were good at it. I'm interested in whether you think so.
I think
too.
that's absolutely right, and that it's to create a sense of intimacy. I mean, when you just think, now it may be Barack Obama is a once-in-a-generation candidate, and no one will capture this again, but just think about the kind of sense of the psychological relationship that people have to Barack Obama who support him, and compare that to the psychological relationship that people have to Mitt Romney who support him. There are people who think Mitt Romney would have been a great president. There are people who like him. There are people who are excited about him. I don't think, you know, that you can, the level of sentiment with Barack Obama is so much greater, the sense of fun and community and involvement. And I think that campaign, as you're saying, Steve, was perfectly tuned to push those psychological buttons of people. I mean, it's a weird way. It's like using technology to create human, to create something that has nothing to do with technology, to create human emotion, which is this sense of connection. And I think the Obama people have done it just like outrageously well.
I don't disagree, but let me just remind you, at least as we realize, we would get hundreds of emails every day. They'd write us about agriculture, the water, and so we would key them all. We knew what everybody would write about.
Right.
And we would get them back, something right away on that. And then when something came up about agriculture or tobacco, whatever it was, we were getting it right back to them. So, I mean, again, this is a more sophisticated way. There's more outgoing it, but it is still an evolution of what we would do in the office, because we had everybody, and you couldn't get an email into the office without us categorizing what was your issue.
Don't you think that's a substantive?
Let me
It is,
just
but
say
it's not
about
connection. That's what you're trying to say.
Well,
what
but yeah,
you
but
said.
we would get back to them, not only on that, but proactively on the issue they cared about.
How people felt about Barack Obama and how personally involved and how fun he was and how hip he was and how modern he was, almost like a John Kennedy sort of feeling about him. Do you honestly believe that, and like John Kerry, 8 years ago, could have created that? I don't think he could have. I don't think he could have. No matter what Facebook he used or anything. It's not going to work. And Mitt Romney was a different kind of person. He was very private. He did not want to expose sort of his hip side or anything. I mean, probably the
His
most...
hip side.
Probably the most, I mean, I said to somebody early on, he needs to use everyday examples of what happened around the dinner table when he had 5 sons. I have 6 kids. I use that all the time in my campaigns about why I thought about schools and how I thought about healthcare and why it meant something to me. And, you know, when my daughter had cancer and the ability that we had it shared with people a human side that engaged their heart. it's the candidate. I just don't think you can take what this candidate could do with his personality and say, well, John Kerry, if we had had the same technology, would have
I
been
think
that
that's a
person.
great point. I think it's a great point. I think we haven't been able to test it. I do also think at the same time that Barack Obama is superbly good at this, that if you look at the expertise they brought, the methodology they brought, the new things they've tried, it's pretty impressive, and it does seem to have heightened these connections in a way that's
These are not
remarkable.
either-or explanations, because your point is a very good one. I've always believed that one of the single reasons why Barack Obama won the first time, and here's a black man getting reelected with an 8% unemployment rate. Now, how did that happen? One of the ways he did it was because he was far better at telling stories. He was far better at doing exactly what you're talking about. And connecting with people and saying, I'm just like you and I understand your lives. But he used the technology to tell those stories.
Yeah, I don't
But
want
it was the story that was the key. Just like it was the 47% that was the key.
It was the connection of the two.
Can I not overhype this? I mean, a lot of it was just straight out demographics.
Yes, exactly.
And you can have all the messaging. We could have messaged all we wanted to some of these communities. It wasn't going to make a difference. We have a party branding issue in some of these areas. It's going to take a little bit more than a candidate to overcome, having had to go through a nomination process.
There's no single explanation.
But it did help on the turnout models.
Oh, yes, it does.
On the turnout models, it's absolutely critical.
I mean, let me just.
Let me just finish.
Go
And the
ahead.
fact that President Obama was able to turn out the people that had been the most hurt in this economy and turn them out with enthusiasm is, I think, a testimony to how this stuff works.
I just say about the demographics too. I mean, I had an inner city district, and it was a part of the community I absolutely loved serving. 2 of my children are African American, and so my husband and I have. First of all, we had all these conversations around our kitchen table the whole time they were growing up about how the African American community takes their full place in our society. I had a great relationship with that community and do to this day. But I had most of those precincts, it was 500 to 8. And then you knew 8 people had voted wrong. You know, it wasn't a cruel thing. It wasn't a mad thing. It was a sort of passed down from one generation to the next sort of thing. And when you talk about registering people to vote, Tom, I mean, you know every single person you register is going to vote on your team. There's no place you could go in my district where I had a subdivision that was like that. You know, and so those demographics help.
Of course, but what we're talking about is the ability, this is why I keep trying to get you to focus on this. One of the...
Because you believe it's key.
Because you just made the point. If you do data mining well, you can find the one person on that block. You don't need the neighborhood or the district. You can find the one person on your block that is for you.
And Steve, the Obama team had a 4-year head start on the Romney team. They had been through this 4 years ago. They kept their lists. They had, it's
and they didn't go down the streets where they were going to find one person on their block. They didn't come down my street.
No, they didn't put the effort into registration.
They went door to door in the areas where they knew where the demographics favored them.
You are misunderstanding how they operated, because they did
I'm very close to somebody who was doing it in
the data mining
Ohio.
is very different from. You are talking about the old way of doing it. You were saying you go to the Democratic districts, you go to the black districts, you go to the Hispanic districts. That is not what they did, and that's not how they did it, and that's not how they won. And Tom knows that, right, Tom?
But I mean, it's the same thing, a different way.
Yeah, I
You
know.
go into the black community knowing that they're most likely going to be Democratic. Okay. You do the data mining, and you get all the information, and you know you don't have to see what the color of their skin is. You know that you got the same thing, because that background you've got from them tells you most likely they're going to be this way or that way. So it's the same thing.
You
just do it a different way.
We used to get the list, the subscription list to Guns and Ammo magazine. We do our fundraising. That was it's the same kind of thing, and they're data mining, and they're scattered all over the place when you get the right lists. And the Obama campaign was way ahead of the curve on this. We were way behind.
Let me ask another question. We've touched on this, but I want to get each of you a chance to give me your view on this. if the message, as Albert Wynn and others have said, is key, if the stories that you tell, as you said, Ann, are key, and I believe this. I think in the end, I've covered every election since 1964, and this is my 12th presidential election, and I missed one. And I've stood outside of a lot of voting booths, and no one ever says, after they come out of the voting booth, you know, I just voted for Al Gore because of his 16-point program on climate change. That is not what they say. What they say is, I like somebody, someone understands me, I relate to somebody. You all have been politicians. David and I have covered elections enough to know this. I want each of you to tell me what you think the story that Barack Obama told was the most effective story this year.
You're going to start with the Democrats on that.
Go ahead, Albert.
I'll start. It was a story not told by Barack Obama, but told by Bill Clinton for Barack Obama. And it was the narrative of the Democratic, that he told at the Democratic Convention when he said, look, here's what's happening, folks. They left us with a big mess. When Barack Obama comes in, he's moving in the right direction, but he's not fixing it quickly enough, so they want us to give them another shot at it. In so many words. I'm no Bill Clinton, he did it very effectively. But that was the ball game. Because Obama, quite frankly, had been struggling to say that. It had not come across very effectively. Bill Clinton says it at the convention, everybody says, we get it. That's it. And that made it very easy for whatever Obama said in his acceptance speech, which people don't really talk about, to be acceptable. But had that story not been played out effectively, I think it'd been a different race.
Who else? Go ahead.
I'd say that I thought his best, and I think it was at the Democratic Convention, all sort of running together. But when he talks about his growing up as a child and the challenges that faced him, and his wife, and that the dream came true for them, I think is the most effective story, because I think every American, no matter where they are, whether they're, you know, have made a lot of money or have been successful in a career or is just starting out, wants to believe that that's the basis upon which our country is built. And him being able to connect himself personally and being able to say, this is who I was as a little boy, this is who I was as a young man, this is who we were as we started out, and we're here to make sure that's true for everybody. I don't think you can beat a story like that, because I think it's the essence of who we are.
Interesting. Tom?
I have a different perspective.
Good.
With all due respect, I think that elected him the first time. He had a wonderful narrative. It was the American dream. But I think after 4 years of basically bad outcomes, they had to shift and they had to go after Romney. And I think they did a splendid job of savaging him, particularly in those key states.
So you think the
of
most
Ohio.
important story he told was about Romney, not about himself?
Well,
Well, I would
Romney
agree.
helped tell that story himself. I mean, you know, you play it on YouTube to be very, I mean, we're being candid here.
Yeah.
But I think savaging him in Ohio, which was a state that
yes.
naturally we should have done a little bit better. You just needed to do a little bit better, doing it early, defining Romney before he get off the bat. I still don't have the slightest idea what this guy's going to do in his second term and his second term vision for everything that Bill Clinton and everybody said. But we do know, I mean, my reelection campaign, in fairness, in 2006, Al, was, yeah, we're pretty bad, but they're worse. I mean, that seemed to be what the theme was, and going back, and they did a tremendous job on that and telling that story, and they did it in a lot of different ways. They did, you know, the media, internet, all this stuff. And I think they did a good job doing that.
That's
And
a good
that was
perspective.
the ballgame.
Bart, what do you think?
Okay, well, there is a sweet and sour aspect of it. But, I go back to to the basics. As my grandfather said, the most important road in the county is the one in front of your house. It wasn't one message. It was the message to the family whose child had cancer that health care is going to be available. It was the message to the person that was concerned about gay rights.
So it's micro-targeting.
It was the message that whether it was gay rights or abortion, choice, whatever it might be. So it is what was that one message that was most effective for that particular person. There's not a macro kind of message. There may be a macro negative message, but again, what's the most important road in the county? And you figure that one out, and you can get to them however you want to, whether it's through social media, through the TV, or whatever. But
And see,
that's
there
what
was a
does it.
lot of micro campaigns going in here.
Yeah.
And micro targeting, they did a great job.
Sure.
of it.
But
On
I would
different-
agree with Tom. I mean, I think I didn't realize that the choice was to also say the story you told about the other guy. But that was the overwhelming story. And I don't think, to be honest, I think it was something that Romney was not able to answer, at least not effectively early enough.
I would agree. I mean, I absolutely agree with Tom and would combine it with something that Ann said earlier. It's also the story that Romney was unable to tell about himself, which is that I think if the Republicans, given the state of the economy, if they had run a candidate who was reasonably decent, they should have won this election. They should have won this election, and Romney was
Well, you
unable.
can't
I'm
name
sorry,
another
I
reasonably
have
decent
to-
candidate that was
I have
running.
to
I'd
say, I think he was more than a decent candidate. I mean, I thought Romney was
Daniels.
fabulous, but I don't think, I think there were some things that happened. One of them was
Wasn't long
that
enough.
he was reluctant to personally tell his story, or that he didn't have that ability.
He was unable to.
Yes.
Yes.
But, I mean, I've seen, they're really bad candidates. I don't think Romney was a really bad candidate.
We had
David,
some really bad candidates,
Yes,
too.
we had some, yes. They were out there.
Did Rick Perry come to mind, Tom?
I was thinking Herman
only
Cain,
as
but we
He
one
went
was,
along.
he was definitely the best of the people who ran the Republican
David,
primary.
but